Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Training Industry Leader Talk, Creating Memorable Training Experiences, sponsored by Adobe, ComLab India, EOB Learning, Skooks, and Whatfix. I'm Avery Vogt, Events Manager at Training Industry, and I'm so thrilled you could all join us today. Before we get started, I'd like to quickly go over just a few housekeeping items to help you interact with our speaker and get the most out of today's program. Throughout today's event, please feel free to use the chat for comments and submit questions in the Q&A panel. We'll address all questions during the event or at the end of the program during our Q&A section. At the end of the event, you'll notice a short survey has popped open in your browser, and we'd appreciate your thoughts on today's event. And as always, all of our sessions are being recorded and will be archived on trainingindustry.com, and you will receive a follow-up email from us with a link to the on-demand sessions. If this is your first Training Industry event, a special welcome goes out to you. Training Industry exists to make connections among learning and development professionals. We offer tons of resources to support your role in L&D through live events like today's Leader Talk, as well as through articles on our website, our magazine, conferences, research reports, and our podcast. We'd also love to hear what you learned from today's sessions on social media, so please follow us on your favorite platforms, and let's continue the conversation. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker, Dr. Alan Partridge. Dr. Alan Partridge is an e-learning evangelist for Adobe Systems. He has served on the doctoral faculty of the University of Georgia and Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and taught education and the arts in universities for more than 20 years. He has spoken to groups around the world about education and e-learning and has an extensive background in higher education and simulations, and has written several articles and books about e-learning, immersive learning, games, 3D animation, and simulation. And with that, we are super excited to have you here today, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Avery. Thanks so much. And thanks to all of you for joining today. It's a thrill, as always, to get to do these sessions and to spend a little bit of time with you. I'm particularly excited about today's topic. You know, I was thinking that in today's sessions, they're back to back to back, and they're all about sort of the direction that things are moving. And I thought, you know, if I were still in college, I would probably make it a drinking game to sort of guess how many words the speaker could get into the presentation without mentioning AI. And I'm not going to get very far. I'm going to let you know that really in today's really fast-moving AI landscape, skills are interestingly still the ultimate currency. And L&D is at the center of this transformation. I don't think you have to look too hard to see that L&D is getting leaned into as we undergo this kind of transformational experiences in our organizations. To stay ahead, organizations need learning strategies that are fast, that are flexible, and that center on people and what makes them different. My grandmother used to say, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Well, it turns out grandma was wrong. You can't even lead a horse to water anymore. There are 11 million watering holes, and the horse is probably on its phone. So today, let's talk a little bit about intelligent upskilling. Let's talk about this wildly moving current that we're all swimming in. And let's start by talking about fizzy soft drinks. So what if everything we know about L&D is actually borrowed from how fizzy soda companies get you to buy soda? Is that a possibility? What do you think? Throw some chat in your chat pod. Think it over. Bring that to each other. What could I possibly mean? Well, when we start our thoughts today, we're starting our thoughts aimed at where the ideas come from and where we're making our decisions about how to move. Starting about 8 years ago, I started to write about the influence of marketing on learning and development because we had such a strong transformation from the marketing world to the way that people actually reacted and interacted. And we've continued to see that take a really dominant kind of route. And it's become something that we very much see focus on. And as we move through the space and start to think about and talk about what kinds of things are happening in terms of global transition here, I think it's important that we maintain an awareness that one of the first shifts that we've seen is this sort of shift toward the importance, the significance of marketing in this space. So one of the things that we should talk about is the connection with neuroscience. I mentioned before 11 million different watering holes. The human brain is believed to be able to process about 11 million bits of information. And you all know I get a little bit fussy when I can't find the exact source of something. So this is a number that I've heard several times. I finally was able to look it up. It does not come from a specific source. It's widely endorsed by a number of different practitioners and different sources, but it's believed that we can process about 11 million bits of information per second through unconscious mechanisms. But the conscious mind, we know, can only handle about 50 in that same second. So the mind is actually only capable of taking in a small amount of the information that's available to us at any given time, but we're subconsciously taking in the whole. And I think that's one of the reasons that we find ourselves feeling these sort of feelings of exhaustion and overwhelm as we face the world and we encounter more and more predominance of media and other sources of stimulus that are all coming in subconsciously, but not actually making it to the surface because we simply can't process that much stuff. Depending on which educational psychologist is your favorite at a given moment, you may have heard similar kinds of things about the limitations of our cognitive ability to process, force us to sort of put things through this funnel, and that through that funnel is how we process. We have to first prioritize, right? So that means a lot of that information is processed without our awareness, that it's subconsciously being weeded out so that we can make decisions about what we want to focus on, what we need to focus on at that given moment. Um, and that amount that's making it through the funnel is actually a tiny amount. The same principle applies to learning. We need to cut through the noise. Traditional L&D approaches fail because they don't account for attention mechanisms. Now, for those of you who are in learning and development, you've already noticed that I've committed an evil sin on this slide. Can anybody guess what that is? I don't even have to check the chat. I'm betting that we've already look at him come. Look at it. Yeah, that's right. That little guy is seriously cute, isn't he? What is he doing? He is stealing my focus. Children and animals, they always say. Well, even worse when you have a little simulated Pokemon or something like that. It draws our focus away and it brings the attention on that object. And one of the fundamental principles that we learn from educational psychology is this notion that when focus is diverted through whatever means, that's going to be a significant problem. And so we're often concerned with engagement, but we have to remember a huge priority here is not just engagement, but where the engagement is going and what the purpose is. See, that poor little guy has nothing to do with the neuroscience connection, right? And the chances are that what you'll remember about this slide is not the amount that the human brain is believable to be able to process. You're probably not going to remember the other kinds of pieces. I hope one thing that you'll remember is that little rascal competed for your attention, right? And that kind of control of attention needs to become a central part of the way that we think about our learning experiences more and more, because more and more people are facing that sort of constant pull, that hyper stimulation from every direction. Now, we could look at it this way. We could say, hey, look, your learning and development platform is processing 11 million bits of information, while your learners can only handle 50. And I think that's what learners have been telling us for quite some time. They've been saying, I'm very busy. I don't have time for this. Do I really have to do this thing? This is stealing attention away from what I'm supposed to be focused on. right? And so the language that learners are using is the language of this landscape. It's language to help us understand that they feel kind of overwhelmed in this condition. We've been treating learning like a buffet when it should be more like a perfectly curated tasting menu, except the chef is now an AI that knows your dietary restrictions better than you do. So if we think about this for a second, one of the advantages as we move into this new modern age of artificial intelligence is its ability to facilitate this problem, its ability to rapidly cull down the noise and focus on the things which need attention. And so, as we march forward, we're going to want to look more and more at opportunities to leverage the AI to act as an attention focusing lens, something that can help us to accomplish the goals that we have for our audience by getting them to kind of zoom in on the things that are the most important at that particular moment in time. So let's think about this in terms of skills. Why are adaptable cross-functional skills key at this moment in time? Look at these little points of research and evidence. The reality of skills disruption is that 44% of workers' skills are expected to be disrupted in the next 5 years. I would argue that that's probably in the next 2 years or 1 year. I have never seen such a massive disruption of the extant skills that workers have. And it wasn't a pretty picture already, right? We know that Brown et al. Did the study with the notion of the half-life of skills and the rapid decay of skills. So these studies have not been strange to us. They've been around, in fact, for quite some time. But now we don't have to just rely on the words of Brown and Denning. We can go further because we're seeing it around us every day. 83% of companies are harnessing cross-functional teams to remain agile. And organizations are empowering employees to make delegated decisions, see their likelihood of success. Those organizations increase by 3.9 times. This doesn't surprise me at all. Um, when I went to college to become a doctor professor, I was told that my path was ridiculous and that it was absolutely contrary to the notion of a doctor. In fact, when most people go to study for their doctorate, some old ancient professor will draw a big circle on the chalkboard or on the whiteboard. They'll draw a big circle, and then they'll come back and they'll use their finger to draw it, just to poke a little hole there, and then they'll draw a little bump on the top of the circle, right? So it's a big circle, it's got just a little bump, right? And the point of this lesson for those future doctoral students is that the vision of the world is that that's the notion of all of your field or your discipline, and your influence is going to be the magnificent achievement of having specialized in one thing, one singular, tiny, minuscule kind of idea in such a detailed and focused way that you manage to make a bump in the sphere of all things in your field or discipline. And I always thought that was sort of funny. Now, my background, my discipline, and even my doctorate are in interdisciplinary studies. My fascination is in the notion that there's a crossover between everything. My father used to say that if you understand the language of any field, you will master that field. His argument was that it didn't matter if you were a doctor or a mathematician, a physicist, or somebody who taught, that ultimately we were all using the same language, but we had vocabularies that were specialized to those individual areas. And if we could breach that and understand the commonality of those languages, then we could very rapidly learn from one to the other. And I found that to be true for the bulk of my life. Now we're at this crossroads, at this juncture, where the skill, which I was heavily criticized for when I was young, is actually the skill which is now in heavy, heavy demand. Because ultimately, cross-functional skills, adaptability, the ability to understand from kind of unified perspective across a wide array of areas is absolutely critical to being able to offer something special in the face of AI, which is able to do things at an incredibly rapid rate, which is able to specialize and focus in very narrow ways. And the more I learn about AI, the more I understand that things like limited context make it so that it's extremely difficult for AI to embrace broad concepts or to compare large areas or scales or volumes of things, and that ultimately it's garbage in, garbage out. If you feed AI kind of garbagey information, then you're going to get garbagey information back out. Whereas if you have a broad base of understanding and information to begin with, you can not only feed it things which are not garbage, but you can enter into a kind of partnership with it, criticizing what it has to say, encouraging it to criticize what you have to say, working back and forth to hone and perfect arguments, questioning, always working critically, self-critically, and critically of the AI itself in order to move things forward. So there are tremendous opportunities throughout this time, which is a really interesting time. And there's also tremendous skepticism. There are reasons, valid reasons for that skepticism. They include ethical reasons, they include reasons that are financial, they include reasons that are skeptical of the capacity or the capability of what can be sort of an illusory practice. And all of those things are very reasonable questions to be asking. But we also know that this is a time of rapid change. And so embracing the change, I have found, is always the best option. Embrace the change, but question it, question it, question it, work through it, find a way to sculpt it and make it your own. That's definitely the pattern that leads to better learning experiences across your organization. You know, the Swiss Army knife, my dad carried the same Swiss Army knife for 40 years. It had everything. It had blades, it had screwdrivers, it had a toothpick. I often remember him pulling it out and using the toothpick at the most inappropriate moments. But you know what it didn't have? Wi-Fi. Today's workers need to be the Swiss Army knives that update themselves overnight. They need to have that kind of Wi-Fi. They need to be engaged with all of these kinds of experiences and technologies in a very healthy way as a part of their entire living experience. And it is probably not going to work well for people unless they're engaged really heavily. And so what I would suggest to you is that you're going to start to see a pattern where people coming out, young people coming out of school or coming out of a period of deep immersion and study may well have some significant advantages in the use of these new technologies, but they will lack foundation. So they will find themselves spinning in circles because they will not have the innovation, the adaptation, those kinds of skills to be able to stop it. You know, I often find that if I'm working with an AI computing assistant and I'm trying to develop some sort of piece of technology, often the assistant will fall into a looping behavior where it tries to solve a problem. It fails to solve the problem. It tries again. It fails again. It tries again. By the fourth time it tries, it's lost its memory of the first time that it failed. And it will now repeat the try exactly that it already made earlier. And it seems absurd to me because I have clear memory of it having attempted that method before, but it has no memory of having attempted that method before. And it's even worse if there's a context compression or some other device where it has to refresh and become a new instance of itself. And in that case, many of those instances will go back and do the exact same processes over and over. It's enough to drive you crazy. And you end up saying, stop, 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 just like you would with a stubborn graduate student. Okay. So the cross-functional revolution, 52% of companies now leverage cross-functional teams for AI transformation. That's up from just 5% in 2023. Top skills priorities are shifting: critical thinking and problem solving, creativity, innovation, adaptation, cognitive flexibility, that limited barrier to um, resisting change. All of these qualities are critically important. And we're going to find that in some cases, you'll find that that kind of resistance to change and transition runs across swaths of your organization, but you may find that it runs in funny places. So I'd encourage you, as you're looking at your organization and where people can grow and change, try to remember that ultimately you may have people in that organization who are about to flourish because of this new circumstance, right? And give them a moment, give them a chance. You might find that there's some real opportunities for you and your organization to kind of push forward and find real new advantages. So now when we think about that building a culture of continuous learning, um, think about it this way. Do you remember when lifelong learning meant getting a gold watch after 40 years of service? Now it means that your skills have the shelf life of a TikTok dance trend. Your skills have a very, very short half-life. And if, in fact, an individual employee is dependent upon skills that they believe they were educated in, and therefore that makes them highly qualified, they missed the game entirely. The game was always to train in critical thinking, adaptability, the ability to move forward rapidly into differing spaces so that they could be tremendously useful no matter what the circumstance. And these are skills that generally have been associated with leaders. And now we need to pull people across a broader swath of the organization into that space. There's a really interesting post on LinkedIn last week from one of the senior leaders at IBM who has been repeatedly coming back to the table with these great insights. And what he said that I thought was absolutely fascinating was he said, your organization is being led by the people in the trenches, by the people doing the AI work. It's being led by the people making those decisions. And he was, of course, absolutely right. Because you see, the rate of decision making, the rate of really fundamentally important choices is so fast that the leadership does not have time to follow or track it. And who's actually making those decisions are the people who are boots on the ground actually doing the implementations day after day. And so his point was that we in leadership, those of us in management, and those of us who are in the situation of being in the trenches all need to be immediately aware that the value in our organization may exist in these pockets of doers and creators that have traditionally been undervalued because they're in fact the ones who are making critical decisions that could be making or losing millions, tens of millions, even billions of dollars for the organization. So there's a sort of explosion of evidence then that we're dealing with here, and it has to do with this sort of demand and supply mismatch. 91% of employees actively seeking to learn new skills, 2% of companies effectively meeting that demand. Oh, holy cow. That's not a number. I deal with studies and stats all the time. This number, which is from a Mercer report that's cited in Training Industry in 2024, 91% of employees are actively seeking to learn new skills. Only 2% of companies are effectively meeting that demand. For those of you, we've been in this business for a long time, those numbers have never looked great, but they have never looked that bleak. 2%, that's just shocking. $7 trillion lost annually in productivity due to disengaged employees. Disengaged employees. Now, think about that engagement and disengagement in a different context, because it's not just about putting in little pokey critters to distract, right? It's about focusing the mind into the areas which are most important. No, the human mind wants to learn. It always wants to learn. It's just human nature to want to learn. And because of that, we can always direct it toward learning. But the human mind is also resistant to commands. And depending on the kind of mind, some are even more resistant than others. For the most part, people don't like to be told what to do. So you have to find ways to recognize and demonstrate the extraordinary power, potential, use, and applicability of those things which you also think are coincident with the best interest of the learners. You know, the sourdough starter. My neighbor during the pandemic gave me a sourdough starter, uh, and they said to me, "Feed it every day or it dies." I, of course, laughed. I mean, how hard could it be? 2 weeks later, dead starter. Skills are the same way. Miss a feeding, and suddenly you're the person still using Internet Explorer. The skills are constantly changing. What is critically important, what is not, is constantly changing. Everything is evolving, is reinventing itself. And so we have to keep in mind that that rapid pace of change drives our behaviors and interactions and brings us to a place where we're, you know, very urgently needing to retrain ourselves and bring ourselves to more and more appropriate place. Now, I want to stop there for just a second and give you a chance to use those chat containers. I didn't do a poll this time, and I usually do a poll, but I thought, oh, you know what? We can actually talk in the chat and have a little bit of kind of feedback or response of that normal old-fashioned like actual text. You know, that's the hot criticism with AI that nobody remembers how to write. I don't believe it. I believe you can all write. So tell me, what is the business impact for you? Does it align with what some of these stats have been suggesting, or is the business impact very different? You'll notice as you're writing your comments in the chat, I hope you're writing your comments in the chat. I don't see the chat flying up, so I don't believe you're writing your comments in the chat. Tell me about what the impact is that you felt. Are you able to measure it? Are you able to detect it? Are you seeing that it's something else? Are you in agreement with these ideas? Or are you critical of these ideas? Where are you? Tell me what you're thinking about this in terms of the business impact. Organizations with learning cultures witnessed 37% increase in their productivity. That's from Deloitte, 46% more likely to dominate the market. That also from Deloitte, 22% higher productivity with highly engaged employees. That's from Gallup. And 92% more likely to devise new innovations. That's from Deloitte. So I saw some chat fly up there. What do we have, Avery? We have some. Oh, look at the chat. It's flying out of control. Avery,
Yeah.
look at all this
Um,
chat.
so I see something from Melissa here. It has greatly impacted our employee morale, but to separate out that it is the only factor is difficult.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Right, because it ultimately there are lots of things that could be influencing employee morale, and it may be the AI, it may be the fear related to AI, it could be communicating. You know, a lot of organizations have sort of taken the stance, we will embrace AI, and it may impact the company. I've been advising large organizations and business leaders since early days that I think that the unwise companies will cut employee lines based on the presence of AI. Most companies were already extremely lean to begin with, and with the exception of some very narrow roles, there aren't a lot of cases where you can just sort of substitute in. I know that there were organizations that sort of in the wake of early studies said, well, we're going to go ahead and cut 30% of our developers, or we're going to go ahead and cut 30% of our fill in the blank, right? And I think that you'll see those decisions reverse themselves rather abruptly, pretty quickly, for a couple of reasons. And these are the reasons that I cited with leaders when I first started to make this argument. One, people do not have short memories. If you fire 30% of your personnel and dump their 30% on top of your other people, now you've just given that person 50% more work, and I'll guarantee you they already thought they were doing twice the work they should be. So now you've got a really angry, grumpy employee who's looking for work elsewhere, and probably justifiably so. And you know what they'll probably do? They'll probably retrain on AI, but they'll look for somewhere else to use those new skills. Um, because you didn't think about the bottom line beyond the first quarter. And that's a very business centric kind of thing to do. Businesses are surviving those kinds of moves. You know, you do get your bonus that quarter if you cut all those lines, but in the end, it'll tank a business. And if you look at the stats on businesses globally, the rate of businesses tanking is absolutely alarming, and it has not gotten any better in the past 100 years. The likelihood is that the organization, whatever that organization is going to go out of business. I believe that number was something like 18 years on average. So the to have an expectation that your organization is going to somehow make it to the century mark, if you're making decisions to kind of cash out every quarter, they're very, very low. The smart businesses are doubling down here, and you see smart businesses that maybe they trimmed before they went into it, but now they're building in the side of being able to facilitate broader AI diversity and moving through with the personnel they have and improving and the experiences across the organization. Those are all plays that are going to pay off. Cutting en masse, that is not going to be a wise play, no matter how you spell it. What does anybody else have anything to say about this one, Avery?
Oh yeah, lots of comments here. Regina said, I've seen a gap of what our organization needs employees to learn versus what employees actually want to learn. So there's a gap of organizational actual need versus like the employee perceived need.
That's a tough one. I think one of the reasons it's tough is because A, should the organization be listening to the employee? And B, d- is there a way that you can communicate more effectively to the employee why the organization believes that that's so critically important? The only thing that I've ever seen work here is change management, focus groups, and not kind of surfacey change management, but really hardcore experiential change management. I'm not surprised that you're seeing that and hearing about it, because more and more I'm hearing from L&D professionals that they're being asked to enter the change management field and become the change management agents. So I would be curious to see if, show of hands, folks in here who've been basically kind of had change management dumped on your doorstep with the assumption that somehow you're change management experts just because you're learning and development or instructional design experts. Yeah. So this guy, you know, you know how every January the gym is just packed, but by February you can hear crickets. We've been treating employee learning like gym memberships. Sign them up and hope for the best. But what if the gym came to you, knew your schedule, and started with just 5 minutes? That's where we're going. We're going to an entirely different landscape where things cater to you. It's one of those conversations that I'm having on a daily basis now with people inside our organization, trying to help them understand that the tolerance that people have for nuisance, for a lack of ease, for a lack of accessibility, for a lack of um, real accommodation for the immediate needs, it is becoming less and less tolerable. It's been that way for a while. You get online and you try to book a hotel or order groceries. If there's one glitch, that's it, you're out, right? That's a very intolerant kind of attitude to have, but it's universally true. And organizations that don't see it are going to be producing content that is content for 5 years ago. We used to say 20 years ago. Now we say 5 years ago. And give me another year, we'll say 18 months ago. Um, that trend is absolutely going to continue. I'm so curious what you guys are talking about in the chat. 47 people are chatting. Avery, should we pause for one more kind of dive into the chat, see what's going on
Sure.
there?
Yeah, I think there's been um, a couple people who are talking about that, due to security reasons, they can't use AI within their organizations. And we're also seeing quite a few people who are working for like state agencies, and they're saying they're running like years behind in implementation of technology. And a lot of their focus is more on like compliance trainings.
Yeah, absolutely. That's universally true. The irony here is that the AI is accelerating at such a rapid pace that even in areas like compliance training, it will improve your ability to produce better work faster. One of the things that I'm seeing is that almost down the line, the folks who are developing educational software, learning and development oriented software have been working around learning objectives and doing things that are specifically true to instructional design best practices in their efforts to sync AI up. This is fascinating because there hasn't been a significant amount of growth in the space of online learning and training over the past 20 years. There's been growth, sure, it's gotten a little slicker, it looks a little nicer, it's a little easier, it's a little more accommodating, a little more comfortable, a little more, right? We're not looking at a little more. We're looking at massive revolutionary changes. We're looking at opportunities across the industry where people are able to produce content which is rich, which is engaging, which aligns to educational principles, which allows you to validate your learning objectives and more, and which is engaging and directly on target, and which is effective in the end, which is actually doing a good job of making important content available to people. Um, you're going to note there that in this particular slide, data on learning and retention, I'm not going to read through it. You guys have had a chance to read through it while we're working on that. I'll just say that, there continue to be significant milestones here, all of which point to the importance of learning and development at the base of this particular problem. So now you might be wondering about my garden here. Uh, my mother always said, you can't pull on a plant to make it grow faster, but you sure can make sure it has good soil. That's continuous learning. We're not pulling on people, we're enriching the soil. Ultimately, you can't yank the roses out by the roots and hope that they'll grow. You have to make sure that they have the right kind of soil to feed them. And I think it's never been truer and it's never been a better opportunity to really leverage that with the people in our organization to give them fertile soil in which to grow. Give them a space which is actually going to resonate for them. Encourage them in those approaches and activities. Help them find the path of least resistance to be able to embrace these new technologies. Because in the end, your organization is only going to flourish if you're among the leaders who are able to actually master these new technologies. They're not going away. They're not inverting suddenly. They're not gonna get overruled or flipped or anything else. They're going to fly, right? We Many of us have seen this kind of innovation trend before. It is directly parallel to what happened with the onset and introduction of the internet. The difference is that it's even faster, it's even more broadly adopted, even more universal, even more powerful. So all of these things are happening. It's also, if you follow my articles, you may have noticed that I've recently written a number of things that include references to the fact that we've clearly hit or are on top of the much predicted singularity, that point at which the amount of information and invention exceeds our ability to adopt and understand all of it. Um, that's certainly where we are, but it doesn't mean that we throw up our hands and give up. It means that we double down. And speaking just for myself, in my personal experience, I couldn't be happier, right? Because I'm I'm feasting on new information every day, right? And that excites the mind. And I would argue that many of your people will be just as happy and just as excited to be able to feast on that. And you're going to reap the rewards because ultimately they will bring that knowledge back to your organization and make your organization excel as a result of that new knowledge. Um, so when we look at this one, these are the four stages applied to workforce development. Stage one, representation, attention. Stage two, predicted value. Stage three, experienced value. Stage four, remembered value. So we're really talking about, from the attention perspective, how are your employees identifying learning opportunities? What is the bottom up saliency? AI recommendations versus top down control, career goals, right? Both of those things have to be relevant in order to guide the attention. But one of the things that happens is because of AI at every level, we're able to offer more awareness, more programs, more control, and so on, because we can produce more at a more rapid pace if we do so wisely and carefully. And I always like to add that phrase wisely and carefully, because depending on how you're leveraging AI in your day-to-day workflow, um, yeah, we had this great example. We had a person who came to the our blog to try and write blog articles, and this person had just entered, really garbage in kind of AI prompts and gotten really garbage out kind of articles, right? Articles that didn't make any sense, articles where the research didn't match any of the content in the article, articles where the research was questionable and not very well sourced, uh, all of the kind of garbage that you could possibly expect, right? And I realized I needed to tell people something. I often use AI to allow me to write so many articles. If you followed me for very long, you know that my article delivery pace used to be about one a month. And now it's not unusual for me to do three a week. Well, I couldn't do that all by myself, but I think the thing that people may miss when they hear me say that, if you turn that off and go, oh, well, Alan doesn't write his articles anymore, that's not true at all. My typical article has 40 or more drafts. Let me repeat that so you follow. My typical article today has 40 or more drafts. Now, when I wrote those myself by hand, I was lucky to get two. And then somebody came in and helped me with the spelling and the grammar and the kind of everyday mundane things, because in two passes, I wasn't all that great at correcting all of my own grammar. Uh, in the difference is phenomenal when you treat these tools as a partner and you go back and forth and you enter into conversational relationships with them. And you understand that by being critical, by being serious minded, by applying the things you already know about rigor and scholarship and understanding the importance and significance of truth and evidence, you'll find that you're able to produce more content much more rapidly. And that's great because you'll also learn much more content much more rapidly. So you never learn content better than when you actually have to go in. And when you're working with a partner who's a little bit like a flaky grad assistant, somebody who you have to check every source, you have to follow up on every notion, then that's good because you're actually validating and verifying everything that you get. So that next phase, predicted value, L&D as architects of predicted value, helping employees envision their future selves, and return on investment of learning beyond the current role. That next stage, the experienced value, that's where this actually gets real as opposed to the supposition. That's about the deeply human aspect of digital learning, about social learning, mentorship, matching, collaborative projects, creating memorable experiences, that sort of thing. And then finally, the remembered value is about building organizational memory. It's about learning culture embedded right inside the DNA of the organization. And nothing moves an organization further faster than to embed a sort of fondness and appreciation for learning itself right into the DNA of the organization. And finally, it's about moving beyond completion rates to business impact. If we understood the business impact potential at the very beginning and we followed through, then we're obviously going to be able to find a way to realize business potential. Now, along the way, there will be opportunities for us to become, I don't know, what shall we say, slightly distracted by shiny objects. And that's okay too. If you think about it, we're sort of treating skills right now like Pokemon cards. You've got to catch them all. When we should probably be treating them like sourdough starter. You need to feed it constantly or it dies. And just like sourdough, everyone thinks they're an expert. And maybe they're not such an expert. And having that little bit of self-doubt can be a really strong way to approach the paradigm. Having a little humility, a little authenticity, a little bit of self-doubt, it can really rock us forward quickly. I gave you an extra like 5 seconds for those of you who are really fond of that little guy. And I think Avery, do we share these slides?
Yeah, we will definitely share these
Okay.
with everybody
I
else.
can already hear somebody's like, I want that for my screensaver. I didn't even read the chat, and I'm guessing it's probably in there. So the
Yep,
images
we
that I the
did.
images that I create, by the way, for you guys, I create with Adobe Firefly. So just a little nod to the mothership there. Um, so the new role of L&D in shaping business-ready talent, the current state, where we sit now, 49% of technology leaders say AI is fully integrated into their business strategy. That means that they have a strategy which is planned and defined, and they believe that AI is fully integrated. I say beans, and I'll tell you why I say beans. I, I have always believed in practitioner first. I've always believed that you have to do it, to know it, to learn it, to teach it, right? And so the first thing that I did was start utilizing everything from generative AI for image generation, video generation, then on into the coding. I was fascinated by the coding phenomena, started vibe coding, started learning programming again. By this point, I'm remembering things that I haven't applied in 25 years. The point I'm making here is that this is going to be a different kind of impact on every single different kind of career space. And for each of those spaces, there are going to be different impacts and different expectations. There were all those headlines about how a AI doctor simulation outperformed regular doctors in the naming and recognition of procedures. But I couldn't help but wonder, based on studies by Pat Kyriakides and others, the mastery that comes from the most advanced physicians who recognize instantly that someone has a disease or disorder almost without a need for diagnosis is something that certainly AI couldn't handle. And when we're dealing with these kind of statistical realities, we're ignoring the boots on the ground realities. And those could become quite dangerous quite quickly. And so diminishing the importance or significance of a highly trained skill, like a doctor, is absolutely the wrong way to look at it. The right way to look at it is to say, oh, thank goodness, my doctor, who had to keep a memorized list of 18,000 procedures in their head, now has a resource which will allow them to pull up any of those 18,000 resources just like that. And then they can cross check it against their own personal understanding and their experience base, right? So it doesn't mean that we invalidate the skills of the expert. It means instead that we leverage AI to augment the speed, the accuracy, the precision of the expert and provide them with additional resources that make their life a little bit easier. And my goodness, with doctors and the speed of patients just growing and growing and growing, don't they deserve to have their life be just a fractional amount easier, right? Rather than have people coming in with WebMD citations right next to OpenAI citations, telling the doctor exactly what's wrong with them, and unfortunately having no medical knowledge and therefore missing 20 other potential symptoms that could be causing their trouble. So each of these things is, in fact, a part of our newly defined role, a part of what makes us tick, so to speak, in terms of our role as learning and development professionals. It's a whole new landscape. I know I must sound like a cliche old man, but it's absolutely a different space, and all the evidence and the research is stacking up to suggest that.
Hey,
You
Alan,
know, yep.
I'm
No,
sorry
I
to
can't
interrupt
be.
you.
I can't be. Am I
We're
out of
already over
time?
time. You were on a roll. I didn't want to stop you.
Avery, already I'm out of time. That's so sorry. I'm so sorry, everybody. I really try not to go terribly over time, but Avery knows that I've confessed to her that I occasionally have been known to go over time. Let me just wrap by saying that it's been wonderful to spend time with all of you. And the slide deck will be available if you want to check it out and study it in a little more detail. I did include slide notes, so the notes are on there as well. You can get a sense of what my take was on each of these pieces. Huge thanks to Avery, both for her patience and to the training industry for hosting me. And hopefully you won't believe that I've gone completely senile, because I did tell you I was going to go too long today.
No, it has been so awesome. That's why I was like, how much longer can we go? It's been so great. Again, as always, you have been a pleasure, and this has been a really wonderful session. And thank you to everyone who has been interacting in the chat. It's been super fun to read all of your comments. And yeah, we will be taking about a 9-ish minute break.
Sorry, everybody.
And up next, we have the session Make It Stick, The Science of Unforgettable Learning with CommLab India. And so in just a moment, I'm going to end this session, and you can join our next session by returning to the event lobby and going to the session tab. And thank you again, Alan, for your time today. It has been awesome. And yes, we will share a copy of the slide deck with everybody. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.